Chapter 3. The Prize. It was Friday, payday, so I shut the door to Master Payun's shop with money weighing down my apron pocket. I walked down Plumeria Lane and lingered for a while around the bakeries at the bottom of the hill, looking into the shop windows and imagining blowing my entire week's pay on one box of doughy egg cakes wrapped in jasmine-scented paper. It would almost be worth it. The sun had begun to set, which usually made everyone in the paper district hurry. Hurry to close up shop, hurry to put out the lamps, hurry to lock the doors so they could hurry home to other people hurrying home to meet them. But this evening was different. Instead of packing up their stores and rushing off to their families and hot dinners, people milled around, huddling together and whispering. I walked in as close as possible to listen in, but I could catch only snatches of conversation. A huge waste of money, if you ask me, but you can't put a price tag on glory. You mark my words, one of those ships is looking for the Sunderlands, and when they find them, Mancon will be the envy of the world. Sunderlands? What in the world was everyone talking about? I could buy a newspaper and find out, but I hated the thought of parting with an even half-leck of my wages. Instead, I headed west, away from the proper lanes of the paper district and closer to Gold Hope Harbor. Here, restaurants and food carts lined the waterfront, which was always crowded now that the war was over. I ducked around the back of a stall that sold roasted duck legs. Greasy wads of newspaper filled the trash bin in the alley. I picked through it until I could find a front page of the Mancon Times that wasn't completely soaked in duck fat. I shook it clean and read as I walked on. Her Royal Majesty Queen Siripatra announces the Expedition Prize, a venture to extend the boundaries and glory of the Kingdom of Mancon. The Queen has commissioned her Royal Navy's finest ships for the expeditions. Captained by the heroes of the longest war, these ships shall sail for all corners of the globe to claim new lands in her name. Her Royal Majesty has directed 4 of her best captains to set their sights for the deepest sea in the north, the lands east of the Hinder Range, west past Rotan, and to break the 50th parallel in the south. Each captain who returns with a map of their discoveries shall be awarded a purse of 100,000 leks. 100,000 leks! My head swam at the number. Mancon must have done better in the war than I thought. I knew the names of the destinations from the maps hanging in our shop. Master Payun had charted those places, but only barely. It was as if the Queen were sending her ships out to the very borders of his maps and ordering them to peek past the edges of the paper. But there was no mention in the newspaper of the Sunderlands, despite what the people in the street were saying. And why would there be? That place was a myth. I combed through my memory for the few scraps of stories I had heard about it. It was a continent floating on the back of a giant whale deep in the southern seas. Or was it a group of islands rooted to the ocean floor like a mangor tree? It was covered in icy mountains. Or was it smothered by steamy jungle? Home to spirits. Home to dragons. That last one was the story that everyone knew because it was the story of Mancon itself. Long ago, dragons swam along the shores of the 9 islands. We were a land-bound people back then with no knowledge of the sea. The dragons took pity on us and taught us how to make boats and ride the waves. They herded sardines right into our fishermen's nets. Soon our people began to thrive, and there weren't enough fish in our seas to feed a growing kingdom and a pod of giant sea serpents. It was time for the dragons to move on. Before they departed, they left us one final gift, a golden egg. When it hatched, out popped a baby girl who grew up to become the first queen of Mancon. As for the dragons, they all swam down south and found a new home, the Sunderlands. No one had ever seen these lands, but they must have been a paradise, because the dragons never came back. Sailors even called the 50th parallel the Dragon Line, because no one had crossed it except the great serpents of old. There were some folks who actually believed those stories, who swore they could show you the cave where their great-great-granddad had found a giant nest full of dragon eggshells. But the most respectful people knew it was all just myths and bedtime stories. That made it even more surprising to hear anyone on proper Plumeria Lane talking about the Sunderland seriously. Maybe more people believed in bedtime stories than I knew. I was so lost in thoughts of dragons and ships and queens that I hadn't realized the sun had nearly sunk and I had left the streets of downtown on long far behind me. I tossed the newspaper into the gutter, then gave my head a shake to clear it. I had reached the western gate of our city. Beyond this point, the street lamps thinned and the roads became muddy footpaths. I stopped to stare up at the gateway, just as I did every evening. In the center of the gateway's arch was a wooden carving of a coiled dragon. Its slender body formed a perfect circle, and it held its tail clamped in its own jaws. That same symbol was engraved on all our coins and delicately stamped on each link in every lineal in the nation. The image graced our flag as well, which also included our kingdom's motto, "The tail is the teeth." That one little sentence held a book's worth of meaning. It meant that the end was connected to the beginning. It meant that where you ended up depended on where you started. It meant that each person was one link in a lineal that went around and around in a never-ending circle, just like the dragon with its tail in its mouth. Good little Mancon children were taught to say the royal motto whenever we walked through one of the city's gates, as a reminder that we are the living links to our past. I stared up at the wooden dragon, my lips shut tight, and then I walked into the darkness, heading for home.